All right, we are going to do the February energy update. It is currently January 30th, and I'm it's almost hard to describe it how different the energy in February is actually going to be. This month, we gave the January update and it just felt like it was going to be a bit of a go. And I think that was probably true for quite a few people, but it's like this softening that's starting to happen, and it maybe did come from some of the uproar, obviously, from January, but at the same time there is a softness that is going to happen in February, and it is going to be mainly around that heart center. So for a lot of people, our hearts are the most vulnerable things, obviously, that we have. Not only does it keep our physical being alive and us in this experience, but it is also this thing that so many believe can be so easily hurt. And once it gets hurt, nobody wants to be vulnerable and nobody wants to be hurt. And yet we've had this world of this intensity of, protect your heart and become hardened almost in a way so that you can be in this experience and not be in this place of vulnerability. And it is changing so much this year for a lot of these old ways of being. But this February, the month of February, is going to be this softening. And whether people like it or not, it's going to happen. And it'll be down to how you choose to react to it, to be honest, is how it will kind of play out for you. But it's this really beautiful spot of like this forgotten part of self in a way. And it's a little bit of a self discovery of no matter how hard you think you might be as a person or how cold you might be as a person, it is not actually who you truly are. And it seems to be there's going to be a softening and a breaking up of that hardened notion of self, if that is relevant for you or maybe prevalent in certain situations. Um, everybody's going to have challenges at certain times in life. And it's not to say that there's going to be a whole lot of challenges that might show up for everybody in February, but just even the generalized challenges that are somewhat going on just in the world and society right now. And of course, if there is anything happening for yourself individually, but it's this softness towards it where it's not feeling like I got to break out the sword and shield and fight it myself. It's this vulnerable part that seems to be looking for a different kind of solution that doesn't necessarily involve anger or frustration and these other parts that often have been so prevalent in our world, when it comes to often fighting for ourselves in that, right? So it's really a month about the heart center and the heart chakra and how that energy is actually going to be flowing and changing, and it's going to be different. And even if maybe you're not a hardened person or a cold person, maybe you have a lot of love and maybe you're almost too generous with that love sometimes. It's going to be another notion where if that's the case, then you're going to start to notice how you're going to have to start giving that more to yourself than necessarily towards others. And you have to be able to learn how to receive it. And so for ourselves to receive that kind of love can often be very hard because we like to give and help others. And yet when it comes to ourselves, we're not very good at always receiving help, love, support, whatever it looks like. And so that's where I think a lot of this emotional capacity might come from, where it just, tears, tears seem to just kind of well up and you're like, where the hell did this come from? What is going on right now? It's like your higher self in a way, and the universe kind of asking you in a way, because everything's changing so much on earth, is like, can you respond differently? Can you actually choose to receive? Can you choose to love yourself in the same way you've loved others? Because the thing about love is everybody thinks it's often outside of us, or things, happen outside of us that create that kind of love. And it's just not true. It always stems from within who you are first. And so this is a month where this newer kind of heart energy is going to come to the surface. And it's not meant to be run away from, and you can't really run away from it anymore. I think that's the big thing that's so different about this month, is so many of us were so good at just like putting it under lock and key, and it's just not going to work this month. It's just not working in February of 2025. And yet there's this beautiful softness that's still so strong in its own right, where it's not to say that you're week for feeling it. It'll be this remembrance of we can all still be soft in these ways and yet unbelievably strong in your own capacity, in your own right, by being in that authentic truth of your own vulnerability. So, and it's not to say because it's all about the heart center, because it's Valentine's Day month or anything like that. That's obviously not what's going on here necessarily, but it is a very different energy. I have to admit that I have felt in the last couple of years. Um, I mean, all for good reason. It shows me that we have true change actually happening here, and that you can create anything still in your own life, and yet at the same time still choose to move forward and release old things or old patterns or old notions if they are still creating a life you don't actually want to be a part of. And but to do that, we do need to become in touch with being able to receive and being able to be in our heart center and actually follow that passion, that excitement that actually lives within it. Because I'm not sure how many actually know, but your heart really has its own kind of consciousness, and it is able to read this world a lot better than most people think. And I think that's what scares so many, because you'll often hear it, my heart knew, I just didn't listen. And it's going to be that kind of months where you might find a bit more of that happening, where you're a lot more relevant in the factor of, oh yeah, this is happening. This is, maybe I should listen, just pause and listen. I'm not asking you to outright, spew it out to the world, but I would say try and do your best at looking at things from a more vulnerable state. And again, you don't have to share it, but sometimes just to share it even with yourself at that conscious level can be extremely uncomfortable, because we're not used to even doing it for ourselves. But yet at the same time, I think it's going to bring a lot of solutions. And I think it's going to bring a lot of solutions to people's challenges, if that is something that's individually happening for you. Or it might bring solution to understanding perspective when it comes to other larger things that maybe you don't have control over. And it lessens this overwhelm, and it lessens this stress, and it lessens these things that we often put ourselves in because we feel out of control. The month of February is not a time for control. It's not a time to try and think you need to have more control over your life than not, because your heart's going to show you very quickly that you were never really in control in that way anyway. So don't make it hard on yourself. Try and do your best to flow with this the best you can. Even if it's going, I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna get super uncomfortable for some people. If this is not an area that you've really touched or been in much, this is gonna be really uncomfortable for you. If it's a place that you've been in and out of maybe a few times, of course, it might be a little bit more gentle, as long as you're being aware and paying attention to yourself and your body. And if you have been here a lot and kind of understand it, it will just be more of a natural flow, likely through this process of February. But at the same point, I think you might be, they just said magically surprised maybe at certain situations and things that might show up for you throughout the month of February, especially if you do choose to be in that flow. And it feels very giddy and happy to me, which is just a really good sign to say that I think there's a lot here to happen for a lot of people in good ways. But we still do have to kind of decide that we're not going to resist or fight that in receiving it, because that's often when we kind of start to block ourselves. So it'll be an interesting month, um, to see this vulnerability, especially with, if you know people, maybe it's not you who, have that hardened shell, but if you know some people that are like that a little bit more, you might be curious to see and watch and observe that a little bit more happening over the months, to see their reaction, and their way how they move through that, because I think this month is going to crack open a lot of people in ways that they just weren't expecting. And I think it's beautiful and it's good, because it's going to show everybody a different side to yourself that always has existed. It's just a lot of us, like I said, have put it under lock and key. So, I mean, if you feel the need to support another, if you see somebody really struggling, or resisting more or less, I would just say give the support through an energetic, not through words. Words are not going to be helpful this month. This is a place where it's really meant to be felt, not said. So I know that can be really hard for all of us being human. We like to use our words to communicate. That's how we feel and been taught, talk about it. This is not really going to be one, especially in support of another, unless they want to talk about it. And in that, right, it will be a listening ear. And it's still maybe not so many words from you, because it's going to be, again, the space is meant to be felt and understood and processed in however that person does that. And so some people may want to use words to express and process. That's fine. But I'm going to tell you right now, most of them are not going to be looking for advice, and they're not going to be necessarily looking for opinions. So it's creating a container, is what we often would call it, to allow someone this neutral space to just process how they need to, and yet they still feel supported because they're able to express it to somebody they trust and love. So I would say if that's what you see more of, and maybe it's not so much you in that state, but maybe wanting to help support others through this next month, don't use your words. Choose to create a space, observe, see them, truly listen. Don't be on your phone, don't be doing the other things, really give them your time and attention in that moment. And you'll notice that you'll see it kind of move through them a different way. And it allowed them a place to process. And yet again, words are not often needed, because they can be strewn in the mind as something else. And so when we just choose to create an energetic container, it's actually a lot more helpful than a lot of people necessarily realize, because now we feel it instead of it maybe being misconstrued in words or not being said in a way that someone else would understand it. So that's the biggest piece for February, is going to be this heart center. I don't see them showing me a whole lot more. They do show a bit of this stillness. I don't know how else to describe it. It's it feels like a stillness it's nearing the end of February. I wouldn't say it's any time sooner than that. It feels more towards the end of February, maybe that transition into March, but it is a stillness of some kind. It's almost like time gets really weird. And I know some people have already been experiencing time weirdness, where it seems really sped up or really slowing down. And that's going to continue, obviously shifting throughout the year of how people experience time. But there's some kind of stillness, and like they're asking for presence almost at the end of February. And I just feel like it's another different expression of understanding how things truly can be, or how different it can be. And yet it seems like it'd be very easy to miss if you're super focused on being busy all the time and running. And in that case, I think that may catch up with you in March. So just be very aware of how you're feeling, especially at the end of February, and choose to participate in this stillness that is going to be very, very present in a way at the end of the month. And it's not necessarily that you're gonna have to do anything with it. It's just meant to be noticed, and kind of an awareness about it, and choosing to be in it to have this experience. And that experience, I think, is going to be different for everybody, just depending on what you're needing in the moment. It's I don't know how else to describe it. That's really all I can tell you in the description of how I can put it into words for you, that I feel and see kind of happening towards the end of the month. And yet it still seems like this self-reflection piece where, January, February are going to be these months where we've reflected on self quite a bit. But when we go into March, it feels like there's going to be some kind of momentum that starts. So, and I wouldn't say that's necessarily down to an individual basis either. That could be also a part of the general collective energy that may start to kind of gain some momentum here in the beginning of March. So it seems like this stillness is kind of like the eye of the storm, where it's been kind of about us as individuals and these things. And something about this stillness starts to bring us back to being a collective. So something maybe along more of the lines of the collective consciousness start to move. And there seems to be this momentum that's going to start to gain in the beginning of March necessarily. So I know there's a lot of things going on in the world already right now. Am I surprised by any of it? No. But if you are, I would suggest that you start paying closer to attention to the energy, not the words that are being said. And if it bothers you, to see the news, if it bothers you to see things, what is happening in the world, I would suggest that you stop. You don't watch it anymore. Give yourself even just the month of February a break from everything, the news, people, drama, all of it. Try to step away from it as best you can because, again, February is going to be a month of the heart. So if you are in the midst of things that are bothering you, it's going to be more intense than maybe what it has been in the past as well, because that heart center and that vulnerability is going to be very heightened. So see it as a blessing, not a curse, because it's not a curse. It's actually a superpower to be able to feel in a heart center like that and move through things from this different aspect of self. So, you know, I guess buckle in because the ride's just starting for 2025 and you kind of get a little bit of a gentler month in a way if you choose it to be that way. And then we're going to get into March. And I can just feel this abruptness in March that comes along with some of this momentum that's going to start to build here. So we'll leave it at that for you. This is a little bit of a I wish I could be more, straightforward, but I think this is definitely going to be an individual journey for every single person. And I only wish you the best. And I promise you'll survive, if it's not going to kill you to feel vulnerable, but at the same point it might be uncomfortable for some. And we'll see you on our next podcast.